Welcome to the Fall and Rise podcast. Today we are joined by David. David, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so David Blackmore, I often say that I'm a runner in quotation marks, just coming off the back of doing all 6 world major marathons in a year. And now looking ahead to what else I can achieve with these 2 legs.
What was your inspiration to do all 6 majors in a year?
It was somebody that I'd seen on TikTok that had just done it. I was coming off the back of having just done the London Marathon for the first time after my second attempt. I'm at this point in my life now where I've done a few marathons at this point. I'm like, okay, if I can train for one, and then you look at like sort of the schedule for the 6th, and you've got 3 in one chunk in the spring and 3 on the other. I thought, okay, well, let's see if I can get into all of them. There was a lot of hustling and, charity and ballots and additional ballots that you can get with Abbott. And yeah, made it work. And it was an absolutely incredible year. My goal for all of them was to do it sub 4. I did Tokyo in, I think, 3:42. At that point, I thought, okay, well, how many of these can I actually do in sub 3:45? And the year carried on, and it just consistently just kept churning out these sub 3:45s, which for me was remarkable, given it was just great to see my body being able to cope with that demanding, consistently churning out the same results, which was great.
David, doing all 6 majors in 1 year is very substantial. Is this your full-time job? Do you not do anything else? Run us through your daily life. What do you do for a career?
Yeah, so I am a TV producer and journalist. So that is a struggle when you're trying to balance a busy working life where you can, at the drop of a hat, be told, right, we need to send you somewhere else to produce an item for this show, or send you somewhere else to report from somewhere. So it's one of those where it's always been the case of just trying to juggle, when can I go out for a run? So sometimes that means I'm going out at like 5 o'clock in the morning, or that means I'm going out at 9 o'clock at night. Just anything I can do to try and get those runs in. But yeah, I would definitely say for me, I've got my job fully committed in the hours that I am. Then before that or after that, it's then almost like flipping to my next job, which is running. What challenge can I do next? Always reading and researching to see what different challenges there are out there to try and have a go at, really, because there are so many incredible things that so many runners have achieved out there, and it's just trying to work out what's next for me, what's on my bingo card for next year.
Can you tell us how you got into running and why you started running?
My running journey is kind of almost in like 2 parts. So the first part of it was I, grew up playing football, was very active, played lots of different sports as well. Then I got to the point where I was going to leave to become a journalist, and it kind of meant that I just needed to kind of put a pin in kind of any sports I wanted to do, because I trained in Newcastle, and then I was kind of then moving in different newspapers around the country. So I never felt like I got settled anywhere to then go, okay, well, let's go check out the local leisure centre, let's go check out the local sports teams or whatever. And I think after a few years of being a journalist, working long hours on on newspapers, sitting in a desk, eating really, really poorly, and I can remember just looking at myself thinking, this isn't the David that I know. This isn't the David I'm used to. And in my head, I was still like, oh, I can still play football. I can still do this. I can pick it up whenever I wanted to. So it was around 2012 that I I did my first 10K, and I did 2 training runs before I went out on that 10K. I was wearing a t-shirt that wasn't a running t-shirt. I was wearing, I think the shorts were okay, and I was wearing like shoes that weren't really running shoes. They were really terrible. And I can just remember crossing that finishing line and throwing up everywhere and thinking, gosh, this is I'm gonna have to take this seriously if I want to actually, do it. And then from there, kind of between sort of 2012 and 2019, I was always trying to get better at this 10K event. There were like 2 10Ks I would do a year, and I just would go from training from one to the other. I'd always wanted to sort of go further, and particularly London Marathon, because I grew up watching that from a kid, and it's always like, if I was going to do a marathon, London Marathon was going to be the one for me. But I was very content with doing these kind of 10Ks, and I managed to get it down from, I think it was 52 minutes. And I think just before COVID hit, I got down to kind of like a 43. And then this is where I kind of always say that my kind of marathon running journey starts, because COVID hits, and then you're everyone's indoors, you can't do anything. Then the government say, hey, if you want, you can go outside and exercise for an hour. So I thought, well, I'm going to go out and run every day. And, went out 59 minutes, 59 seconds, I was back in the door. But I just got into that habit of just doing something, moving forward every single day. And then by this point, I've got a lot more of the gear, a lot more of the ideas when it comes to running, decent shoes. And then I got a place into the London Marathon in 2021. And yeah, it's just really progressed from there.
David, as you say, you did your first marathon. There was a bit of a story with that, I believe, in terms of you had a bit of an issue. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for London 2021, obviously, as I said, it was my dream to do this marathon growing up, and it was the only one that I wanted to do. And it was very much a case of, I thought, if I did London, then I can go marathon, tick, and then kind of move on. During training, I think this is quite common for a lot of runners when they're starting on perhaps their marathon journey. I perhaps pushed myself a little bit too hard too soon to try and kind of achieve that goal by going harder and longer and faster than ever before. And I'd had like a stressed pelvis, and it was a case of going, well, am I actually going to even get to the start line? And then I had just someone reach out to me on social media and say, hey, look, I know you've got this injury at the moment, but we've got enough time that if we do a combination of like cycling and swimming and rowing and running, that I'll get you to the start line. Yeah, sure enough, I got to that start line, was feeling confident. Weather conditions seemed okay at the time, and having not done a marathon before at that point, and actually it was only during training that I'd even gone above kind of a half marathon distance, or even get into a half marathon distance. You wasn't really sure how your body's going to kind of react to it, and I felt fine throughout. And then just getting kind of past that Canary Wharf bit where, my watch always goes crazy past that point. It's always going wrong, and it's trying to then do the math when your brain's just trying to compute stuff after running 20 miles. And the short version is I then collapsed with heat stroke. The slightly longer version is that I can remember running thinking, I don't feel right here. Like I'm starting to feel a bit sluggish. And there was one point that I can remember where my head, the best way of describing it, just feeling incredibly heavy. So I kind of persuaded myself, if I kind of run with my head in my hand, that I could do that for kind of 3 miles. And pretty much that is the last thing that I can remember. I have since had like a couple of flashbacks of some runners kind of stopping and picking me up. And every time I kind of stood up, then coming back down again. And the next thing I remember is waking up in a St. John ambulance tent and kind of, everything off, ice all over me, someone fanning me, and them asking me where I thought I was. And I don't know if anyone else does this, but for me, once I get towards like the end of a marathon, I start to break it up into like laps of a running track. So in my head, I'm going, so it's 25 miles I collapsed. Yeah, I just basically, whatever I worked it out as. And I said, oh yeah, no, I'm at a running track. My parents are just over there. And they were like, no, so you're running the London Marathon, you just collapsed with heat stroke. And then it was like even getting my phone out. They said, oh, here's your phone. You can contact your your loved ones and to let them know. And I was like, this isn't my phone. Like I have no idea what that was about. And my brain was just absolutely fried. It was one of those moments where I think can really define you as a person, as a runner as well. I think it would have been very easy for me at that point. I mean, it took me kind of a couple of hours and to sort of get my body to sort of cool down and regulate itself again. And I only had a mile to go. I could have walked it, but for me, that's not how I wanted to finish the London Marathon. That's not how I wanted to do it that day. So I was done. So I left and then spent the kind of next week on the sofa, really just licking my wounds and thinking, gosh, what could have been? And I thought, you know what, this isn't going to be the end of that marathon running story or journey for me. So I had a quick look at what running events were coming up next, and Brighton was down for April in 2022. So I thought, okay, dust myself off. I did give myself a couple of weeks just over all the physical issues that I had and sort of with my sort of cognitive issues that I had after having heat stroke. And then it was a case of getting back out there, lacing up. And yeah, that's why I always say that that's where kind of the second part of my running journey starts, because it could have been very easy for me just to stop there and then in January and go, oof, do you know what? Marathons are tough. They're not for me. I think I'll just leave it. But no, I went on, and in 2023, I finally got what I would say is like my revenge on the London Marathon by completing it. And as a boy who had always dreamed of that last shot of running down the mile, Buckingham Palace behind you, and finishing, I can remember just how emotional I felt, just turning the bend that goes sort of to Buckingham Palace on your left, and just then seeing it, and it was just the greatest feeling, everything that I could have hoped for as a young boy.
Mentally, how did you pick yourself back up from having that setback of not finishing so close to the end to 2 years later you finish your dream? How did you mentally go about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually, because I'm not sure how much mentally I must have processed it quite a lot the week after the collapse, and then had the thought process to go, do you know what, I'm going to sign up for the Brighton Marathon. But looking back on it now, it was very much just a case of I kind of played it very well. This is what's happened. If you want to do this again, you're going to have to put yourself out there. How soon can we do it? Brighton, let's do it. It was only kind of when I'd got to probably like during the course in 2023, and getting to the point where I was getting close to where I collapsed, and just then starting to reflect on the journey that I'd been on, because up to that point I'd done the Brighton Marathon, I'd done Vienna, because slight tangent, during COVID I had a flight booked to Austria that had been cancelled because of a lockdown, and so after I'd collapsed with London, because it was in the October 2021, and I'd looked up things to do in Vienna in April, because I had to use the flight by that point. And the Vienna Marathon was like 2 weeks after the Brighton Marathon. So I thought, oh, if in for a penny, in for a pound, I'm just going to sign up to do Vienna as well. So then I went back out and did that. And then did the Atlanta Marathon in Georgia, USA at the start of February 2023. So heading into London, mentally, I had learnt so much between October 2021 and April 2023 in terms of just so many little things with running, in terms of fueling, hydration. I mean, I do any race that I do now, I'm constantly nervous and worried about a heat stroke and having another collapse. So I do tend to obviously try and hydrate the best I can, but there are points where I do sometimes think maybe I'm taking on too much water to try and stop that. But there were so many things that I've learned and I've done better, and the training for that London Marathon in 2023 just went so well. And there's nothing quite like that feeling of just knowing you've got it. As it went on, I can just remember feeling like, yes, your legs do start to tire, but I can just remember thinking, I've still got more than enough in the legs to keep going. And it's just that feeling of running, that stretch leading up to Big Ben, when you've kind of got the Thames to the left of you, up sort of Tower Bridge heading down. It's like a kind of a 3-mile stretch, and I'm just kind of weaving my way through a sea of walkers at that point, and I'm just going through. And I think I'd learned quite early as well to always have your name on your vest or your top. I just remember there's people just sort of cheering me along that day in particular. It was such a fantastic atmosphere in London, and yeah, definitely. I don't cry often, and I think most marathons at some stage, and there's a point where I've always choked up for various reasons, particularly like as I got close to where I collapsed in London 2023. I can remember getting quite emotional, but then even in Brighton, when I actually then completed my first marathon, it was, I think, foolishly signed up for Brighton thinking it was going to be a nice flat course. I didn't really look at the elevation profile, which is another lesson that I learned going into every other race. But I can just remember getting onto the seafront eventually. It just seems like it takes forever to get to the seafront, and just stopping and walking and just thinking, I know I've only got 2 miles, but I just don't know if I can get there in below 4 hours. And I ended up doing it in 4:02. But I can remember a bloke just came up next to me, and he was like, David, you've got to keep moving forward. You've just got to keep going. Whatever it takes, just keep putting you. I will run with you. And he just ran with me just for a little bit. And I can remember just like the cheer, because he was then getting everyone that was along there to cheer along with it as well. And just remember feeling how emotional I felt when that was happening, still getting goosebumps about that now. And then crossing the finish line, and actually you forget so much of those races, those little moments that kind of spur you on and really do create a memorable day, but also really bring out that emotion, which you can then use as almost like a bit of a weapon to just try and override your body and your brain when it's going, we're in overdrive, we're really struggling here, you need to stop, you need to slow down. And you're like, no, do you know what, I've just got 2 more miles to go and then I can stop. And yeah, it's always the way, isn't it? You cross the finish line having just run 26 miles and then you can't walk for the next like week. Your body recovers from it all. But yeah, any tool you have mentally to do it. But definitely the mental aspect of running that's perhaps one thing I'd always underestimated. It's only when you go through something where you have collapsed and you're having to dust yourself off and pick yourself back up again that perhaps you realize that yes, you need to get your body ready, but you also need to get your mind ready for taking on whatever challenge it is, whether it's a marathon, whether it's an ultra marathon, whether it's a sort of a 10K, all of those come with different challenges, both physical and mental.
You spoke there about some of your fears that you developed from all the sort of things that you'd faced along the journey and the setbacks you faced. How do you personally, mentally turn your fear into fuel going forward from learning from those mistakes and things you've been through to better yourself and make sure that your mental strength is just iron?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head in terms of that learning. It's turning that fear into fuel in the sense of learning from the mistakes and it happening. But the thing is even during those 6 majors, I was learning little bits from each of those that I was able to move on to the next. And it's just having an honest conversation with yourself, having a debrief, making mental notes as you're doing things when things do go wrong. Luckily for me, apart from the collapse in London, whenever I've had any other setbacks, it's tended to always be in training, which I think is always great. If you do have a bad training run, I think I learned that quite early on, that actually that is the point to learn from those mistakes. And how do I avoid repeating that on race day? And also, if you've got something that works for you, keep doing it. Everyone always says about don't change things on race days. And it's so true, because you need to feel comfortable in yourself physically. Mentally, it's just processing that and reminding yourself that you are going to do it. Like, I'm sure there's lots of people listening that when you get to the start line and you've got 26 miles in front of you, 26.2, sorry. And you're standing there and you're thinking, okay, this is, you're going through that mental checklist. And I just kind of just try and block out absolutely everything that's going on around me, the starter and all the fun and games that are happening at the start line and the start area. And I'm just purely focusing on my breathing, my game plan. I'm trying as best I can to kind of visualize what I'm going to be doing at various points. And that can be, when we talk about learning from mistakes, like one of those ones from Brighton was about the elevation profiles. Before my next race, I will go through the elevation profile on that and just have little notes. Sometimes I'll write it on my hand of points where I know it's going to be particularly difficult and points where I know it's going to be not as tough, not as painful. And it's just trying to make a plan. Like I'm always constantly planning ahead. What am I doing now? When am I next? Structuring everything. I think if you do that, takes away a lot of what if this happens, because you've tried to tick off as much as you can. And I know that people say that absolutely anything can happen on marathon days and you can't plan for everything. But I feel like over the course of all the marathons that I've done, I can probably plan enough that covers the majority of the issues that I'm going to face. But equally, you always have to have something about you that you're able to adapt as you go if things change dynamically. Like London last year, my training was the best. This year, the training was the best that I'd ever done, and I felt so strong. And then it was a really cold weather-wise training for me. We get to London Marathon weekend, and it's absolutely scorching. And it's just like, okay, well, especially with the heat stroke collapse in the back of my mind, okay, how are we going to mitigate all of this? How are we going to try and navigate this? Actually, I think just having had the experience that I've had with the different marathons, it was a case of, okay, right, I know what I need to be doing here. On the course at the start, it looked like I was going to be getting like a 3:25 marathon. And then very quickly I realized, heart rate's going really high. you need to just try and adjust. And it was looking like a 3:30, then it was looking like a 3:35, and then I was on for maybe like a stat, and then as most marathon runners do, you get to the point and it's like, okay, I need the toilet now, and it was like, okay, well, it's going to cost me a minute or two, But it's one of those hot days where, when it's hot, these react differently. You need to go to Luke, need to go. So yeah, it cost me a minute or two. But yeah, it's just trying to navigate all of that in the best you can so that it doesn't affect you. Because mentally, especially when you're running longer distances, when you get inside your head and you start telling yourself you can't, your body will follow suit and it will stop. If you can keep telling your body you can, your body's capable of incredible things.
David, you are someone who's just took a moment in your life where you thought, you know what, I'm going to do something more here. And now you've gone on to complete all of the 6 world majors. You've done 12 marathons, I believe, if I'm correct. 12
yeah.
marathons, or surrounded by some of the people who are doing crazy challenges, such as the Berlin 100-mile race. What is it about you that made you have this drive within to push yourself like you do?
I think for me, I've always been someone who wants to kind of push myself or push the ceiling of perhaps what I may or may not be capable of. And I think the first thing really was that focus on my career and journalism, and then moving into TV. I think once COVID hit, I then became very apparent that maybe I wasn't looking after my mental and physical health as best as I could. So once we kind of navigated those kind of lockdown years, and then I've come out the back of it and I'm starting to run, I really noticed that the more I was moving my body, the better I was sleeping, the healthier I felt, but mentally, just how much better it was for me. And I think that's where I've always come at it from the exercise point of view, is that actually, if I don't go out first thing, because I can't, and I have to go out in the evening, I'll be sitting there itching to go out, because as soon as I do, whatever stress or noise that I've got going on in my mind at that point, it just completely washes away. And actually, on the flip side of it, when I go out first thing in the morning and go and exercise, any issues that I perhaps the day before would have found was like a complete mountain suddenly just becomes a complete molehill, because you're like, okay, I'm calm, I'm stressed. And I think discovering that about myself, it was like, okay, if that is going to be the way forward for me in terms of keeping myself moving and keeping myself going forward, how can I challenge myself? And then it's the two side of it. It's like, well, what do you want to achieve? I did the 6 marathons and I was like, okay, that was great. But for London, can I push myself just that little bit harder to see if I can run quicker than those marathons, which I did. And then with this Berlin event, I was celebrating with a few people that had done the Chicago Marathon. The guys there were like, oh, we're thinking about doing the 100-mile Berlin Wall Race. Do you want to take part? And I'm thinking, 100-mile ultramarathon is probably a bit beyond me for now, but a bit beyond me. But I was like, hey, if you guys, get a little group, I'll come support crew you, and ended up, cycling all around Berlin this weekend because of that. And it's just trying to work out what challenge is I'd be looking forward to, because I think doing something new is perhaps what excites me, and giving myself a different challenge. And I'm doing the swim serpentine event. Now I'm really a runner. I have done cycling events, did the Berlin Wall cycling around with others, but yeah, not so sure about swimming. But then, and I think this probably might actually answer your question rather than what I've just said, is that with the swim serpentine, you get the London Classics medal, which is if you've done the London Marathon and you've done Ride London, and then if you swim the serpentine, you get this medal. And I was like, oh, I do love a medal. Okay, go on then, I'll do it. So yeah, I've, as well as preparing for this Berlin Wall cycling and supporting, I've also been like in and out the pool doing lengths. And it's, if anyone could have filmed my first swim as part of this training plan, I think they would have thought it was hilarious. But then looking back at just how far I've come in the pool in such a short amount of time, I don't think I would have perhaps achieved that if it hadn't been for the running. I really do feel like I know my body really well. I know how hard I can push it. Also know how tough it can be when you need to push your body and get to its limits. Yeah, and it's just constantly seeing what is next on the agenda. And if one of the questions is what is on the agenda for next year, I don't know at this stage. I'm very influenced by things that I see that other people do online. There's a lot of fantastic runners that I follow on TikTok and Instagram. And there's so many kind of events that they've done that inspire me to think, okay, that it's on my list. I think a lot of the time it just needs to be kind of right time, right place, you know?
Are there any lessons that you've learned from training for your challenges and completing those challenges that you've transferred to your professional life?
Yeah. I'm actually have to think about that for a sec. Say the question again.
So, is there any lessons you've learned from completing and training for your challenges that you've managed to transfer to your professional life?
Preparation is the key for everything. I know that there are people that just seemingly do little training and then are able to go and run a marathon, but actually, for the vast majority of people, and I would love to see those people in the next week, 'cause they probably won't be able to walk. But I think it's the how important the preparation is for it. Constantly, in anything that I do in life now, there's a constant preparation and plan to try and figure out what I can be doing, when I need to be there, et cetera, et cetera. But also, what if things go wrong? But I think in the past, perhaps I've been be naive enough to think, oh, this will be fine, this will work out. And it obviously doesn't always, like it does with running. But also the looking after yourself part of things, you know, I think in the past, particularly maybe with work and stuff, you kind of just push yourself so hard, and then you try and play hard as well in terms of sort of going out, seeing friends and things like that. And then just the knock-on effect it has on you physically and mentally on your body, and actually just taking that time to realize that, yeah, you do need to have a good number of hours of sleep. And actually, what is the right number of sleep? I think it's all down to individuals. I know people that sleep for 4 hours a day and absolutely fine. I know others that do 12. For me, anywhere between that kind of 7 and 8 is probably about right. But I think that they're definitely, with everything that I've experienced with the training side of things, has really impacted professionally and personally, to make sure that I always put myself in the right mind frame to tackle whatever the day throws at me. But also as well, perhaps a better understanding of food and hydration and all those different things. I think just understanding, you know, food is fuel, and how are you going to be able to fuel yourself through the day? And, you know, especially when I look back to my early journalism day and the food that I would eat then compared to perhaps how I would eat now to help fuel myself better throughout the day without it having too much of the bad stuff in it. So I think there's lots of things that have worked that way, but equally there's been lots of things that have transferred the other way. I think always, as I said earlier, wanting to push myself professionally kind of really helped. I think I'm always quite a competitive person, and I think there's no better competition or challenge than you versus you, because if you can continually better yourself, then you're always going to be on an upward curve, and that's what I always try to achieve. And I'm constantly adapting and going through again what my goals are. And I put up a post on TikTok a while ago. It was a trend, which is basically saying, you know, what is my worst PB? And, you know, it's all a bit tongue in cheek, but, you know, a lot of people were like, you know, based on what your half a marathon time is, you should be able to do quicker, you know, 5 and 10Ks. And I was like, do you know what? I've never actually really focused on those. I mean, I think sometimes I'll go and run a 5K park run before I start a new training block, just to kind of get a bit of a test as to what my kind of current pace is, what I need to work on. But yeah, there's loads of little things like that kind of work both ways for me.
Regarding your 6 world majors, they've recently added Sydney as the 7th. What was going through your head when you found out that there's another one to do?
When they announced that Sydney was going to be the 7th major, it was at that moment just crossing the finish line of the New York Marathon. I've become friendly with a few of the people at Abbott, and they said, "Oh, what's your kind of predicted finish time?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm hoping for anything kind of sub 3:45." And they were like, "Oh, we're not going to be at the finish line at that time." Like, that's odd. Why would they, like, that's quite a peak time to get a few people, particularly like, you know, 6-star finishers or celebrities and everything like that. That's odd. Anyway, I did the run, and then, yeah, when I crossed the finish line, got the 6-star. One of the volunteers that was there at that time was like, "Oh, no, you've got Sydney to add to the list." And I was like, "What?" And like, "Yeah, they've just announced Sydney." So I cannot believe it. I literally set out with this goal of completing the six-star medals in a year, doing that, and then I'm like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna add Sydney to it." And I was like, "Oh." So the first bit was, I was kind of a bit divided on it all, because then I started to read up on it, and, you know, there's they're in advanced stages now of like, Shanghai or Cape Town being added and making it and having a bit more of a goal of them two adding to it, a bit further down the line. And it's like, okay. So I think mentally I looked at it and I was like, okay, I set myself this goal, you know, in this calendar year, there was only 6 majors. That was the goal I set myself. That is a goal I've achieved. So I will park that over here. For Sydney, I was like, okay, well, when am I gonna look to do that? Like, when is it gonna be on my list? And I think for me, my thought process with it now is that once more get added, if it is another 3 that get added, my thought process that I'll try and do maybe those 3 in a year to then try and tick that off if that's possible. The only issue with those 3 is that there's a lot of traveling involved in all of it, and I definitely struggled in Tokyo with the kind of the jet lag that way. I'm not a lot better going the other way to sort of the Americas. But I mean, it's great that that Sydney's been added. Like, I think it's from what I've seen and from what I've heard from other people, it's a fantastic marathon. And one day I will head out there and complete it. It just needs to be, I think, if I'm going to do Sydney, I think I need to go to Australia, which I've never been to before, and make it a much longer trip. And that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about running, which has just been that kind of travel tourism. I was in Vienna for like an extended long weekend. I was in, when I've been to America, I've always tried to make the trip a little bit longer so I can see a little bit of Chicago and Boston and Atlanta that I've been to before as well. And then my only regret was perhaps with like Tokyo. I didn't spend as much time exploring Tokyo and other parts of Japan that I would have wanted to have done. So I think it's I'm all for other majors being added. I don't think it needs to be capped at 6, particularly as 3 of them are in the States as well. I think that it should be opened up to more marathons. It was just a bit disappointing that it was announced literally the moment I was crossing the finish line of the New York City Marathon.
We ask 3 set questions. The first one is, who inspired you to do what you do?
Professionally, I was inspired to kind of go into journalism because my uncle Gary, he used to write these little kind of sports match reports. It's sort of for like the local newspaper, it'd be like non-league match reports. And I was like, oh, I'd love to be a sports journalist. So it was that kind of inspiration that led me to then do English at A level, where I didn't do very well English at GCSE, but I managed to get an English at A level, and then that's opened the doors for me. I've always wanted to be a sports journalist, but was always told by various sports editors, going to news and go and see what that's all about. And then once you learn how to write and how to write a story, how to interview someone, come back and sport and go from there. I've never gone back. So I would always love to be a sports journalist. And I think sports is always something that I've been hugely passionate about. I think for me growing up, anytime I watched the London Marathon was something that always inspired me. And every year it'd be like, okay, I'd love to do that one year. And then there was a time when if you entered the London Marathon ballot so many times you didn't get a place, you were guaranteed to get one the following year. And I can remember being like, right, I'm going to enter every single year. I'm going to be really dedicated, not going to miss a year, to make sure that when it gets to that particular year, it was either four refusals and that you get in the 5th or something like that. And then the year that they changed the rule because they basically had too many people that had applied that would automatically get a place, they had to change the rule. That was, of course, the year that I was going to get my place. So, but watching it every year was so inspirational. And it wasn't necessarily seeing the fast runners, although I think Paula Radcliffe, for me, was always a huge inspiration just to see. For her, she's always achieved such incredible things, but she had more obvious signs that she perhaps was struggling. You could always tell when she was struggling in a race. And I just think, how she was able to continue to compete at such a high level. And I'm sitting there watching, cheering her on. But also I was always a huge fan of watching sports growing up, particularly like the Olympics. And you'd see some of the long distance events there, always hugely inspiring to me. I think I'm probably one of those stereotypical people that there's maybe some events that I will watch once every 4 years and suddenly, like, I don't know, kayaking, or suddenly I'm an expert at it. Definitely the track and field was always something that I was hugely passionate about. And just people like, I know it's not long distance running, but people like, Jonathan Edwards, Sally Gunnell, they're just seeing those people and people that I just kind of resonated with, and people that had got themselves to the top of their discipline in the sport. And that was always inspiring. Not saying that I'm achieving to try and achieve anything that's going to be like top of the marathon running world. I think that those kind of targets change over time. Definitely just seeing how hard they have had to work to achieve what they have was always a huge inspiration to me.
Yeah. So our second question is, if your younger self could see you now, what would they say?
I mean, the younger David, particularly kind of around between that time 10 to 20, would be so proud to have actually finally achieved that London Marathon. I do think a lot about what if on that day I hadn't collapsed, or in 2021, what if I'd got back up and decided to walk that last mile? Would I have continued? Because I think what would have made younger David really, really proud is how much I've gone on to achieve since then. And how I've just continuously pushed myself to do kind of more and more. I think there would be some challenges that they would probably think that younger David would be like, well, I didn't see that one coming, or it perhaps wasn't on the bingo card for them growing up. But on the flip side, I think if I could go back to my younger self, I probably would have maybe encouraged myself, particularly around kind of 18, 19. That was a stage where I'm kind of making those steps into journalism. Suddenly that's become like a passion over perhaps the sports side of things. And I do wonder perhaps if I'd at that stage continued to have looked after myself physically, it would have led to being better mentally. And I think I probably would try to have encouraged him to do more physically, especially in those early years before I then kind of had to kind of check myself and go, okay, you need to start doing something to try and get yourself back in shape. And you can't just let yourself just sit at a desk typing news stories and not getting out and moving,
The final question we have for you is a message for anyone who's listening at home.
The one question that people always say or one thing that people always say to me is, oh, I can never run a marathon. And it drives me absolutely insane, because my first question back to them is, well, can you run 5K? And they go, oh yeah, but I'm not as fast as you. And that also annoys me. It's never a comparison between, I think naturally we always look at others. When I get to the start of the marathons, I'm not what people would say, and I'm probably being a bit of a hypocrite by saying this, but I would look around people and go, I don't look like a natural marathon runner, but they look like natural marathon. They look like marathon. But actually, we're all here in the same pen. We're all going to run 26.2 miles, and do you know what? We're all going to get the same medal at the end of it. And I think it's so true when you look at people that go, oh, I'll never be able to run a marathon. It's like, well, do you want to run a marathon? Because if you do, if you want to do a half marathon, if you want to do a 10-mile event, if you want to do, a 10K, whatever goal it has, just keep moving forward. Just set yourself goals. Like, it may be that you only want to do 5Ks. It may be that you're not looking to potentially, go much further than that. It may be you want to focus that and go faster, or whatever it is, whatever the goal is that you're working towards. Just do it and don't judge yourself to others. I think that's the worst thing that I think runners do. And that's something that it took me a little bit of time, but once I got my head around it, and it's very much a case of you versus you. I think just focus on that. And it's all about setting yourself little goals all the time. And, this is obviously speaking to people that are, or perhaps aren't running, or only doing it, maybe more casually, but just setting yourself your little goals, rather than going from, I can't run a marathon to, oh, I'm going to enter the Manchester Marathon. That is a big leap to make. But actually, if you set yourself the little goals along the way, find people on social media. If you like someone on social media who you resonate with as a runner or someone working out, follow them, engage with them, learn from them, because there's a lot of runners out there that are telling you the things that they've learned. Try and implement it into what you do. With any runners out there, in terms of what I would say to them is just constantly keep pushing yourself, keep looking at other challenges. Don't get comfortable, I think is a thing that I always say to myself, because getting comfortable is entering the same race year on year. Beauty about running and beauty about all these kind of events is that they're happening all over the world, all over the UK. Go and see other parts of the UK. Go and do things that you never thought would be possible. Push yourself in different ways. If the younger version of David had, I've always wanted to do a triathlon because I've watched the Olympics. But I can always remember saying to myself, well, I've not run a marathon? How can I even consider doing a triathlon? But now that's in my thought process. Now suddenly people are messaging me going, do you fancy doing an Ironman? That's probably too far away from me right now, but it's now something on the radar. And I just think, just don't limit yourself as to what you and your body can achieve, because we all know what it's like when you're in those really bad, dark places on race days. But the training that you put in, what you put in for it, is what you're going to get out on race day. And as long as you try to tick off all the other boxes of things that could potentially go wrong, trust your body and it definitely won't let you down.
I suppose you could say comparison is the thief of joy. It's about your journey that matters. David, thank you very much for your time. It's been great to have you on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. I love the pod. It's fantastic. And it obviously, from my running journey, it really resonates, because it's someone who literally was at the bottom of what you could be, being carried by central ambulance paramedics to attend really confusing days, and to what I've gone to achieve. So yeah, thank you for the podcast. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.